So before we begin fully, welcome to everybody attending and watching via the webcast. We welcome the use of Welsh language at our meetings, but as I've received no requests to speak Welsh today, this meeting will be conducted in English only. This meeting is being transmitted live via the webcast and will be available to view wherever and whenever people wish to view it. This means there's no need for any other filming of the meeting to take place. But please do remember that you may be visible on camera when others around you are speaking, and when you are speaking, to speak clearly into your microphone. If the fire alarm sounds, follow the green signs out to the Civic car park, and can I ask that all mobile phones and other noisy devices be turned on to silent. Finally, if we have any motions put forward during the meeting, I'll need them to be clear and preferably in writing before we go to the vote. Okay, so if we move on to the agenda proper, item 1 is attendance, the register's going around. Item 2 is apologies for absence.
Apologies from Councillor Glyn Karen, Leonard Constance, Cathy Evans, Stuart Evans, Raymond Mills, Alan Slade and Neil Waite.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry, Chair, I am here.
Are you sure? Are there any others we need to mention? Kelly? Joe Gordon? Yeah. Anybody else? Okay, thank you. Those are the apologies. We move on to item 3 then, is declarations of interest, so I will ask Alice to advise us.
Thank you, Chair. I will give advice to members in relation to the exempt item, which is number 18, when that item is being discussed. Apart from that, I'm not aware of any other interest for members. Thank you.
Members, do you have any interests you wish to declare? If any come up, just remember to write them into the attendance register. Okay, item 4 is confirmation of council minutes. So if we first look at the minutes from the 22nd of October, does anybody have any accuracy issues with those? If not, I'll be happy to agree them as a true record. Yeah, thank you. And then if we look at the minutes from the 9th of January then, same again, any issues? Yeah, Robert.
Thank you, Chair. It's on page 30 and it's to do with my personal declaration. It's not in regarding me being a registered social landlord, it's me being private sector landlord. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, with that correction, are we happy to record them as a true record? Yeah, thank you. Okay, if we go on to item 5 is actions on updates. Are there any issues on this one? This is page 43. No, okay, and then item 6 is, if I can get the webcast to go, is the receipt of petitions. There are none today, so we move straight on to item 7, which would be public question time. Again, there's been no questions submitted. So item 8, announcements from the leader.
I'd just like to associate myself and all members with the words of the pastor there about Holocaust Memorial Day. Thank you to all the councillors who attended the event last week at Crane Street Baptist Church, and it's right that we mark that day to remember the horrific events of World War II and the Holocaust. Can I also associate myself with the comments about former Councillor Margaret Peed? She's someone who attracted great respect and affection across the chamber, and we thank her for her work and pay our respects to her family at a difficult time for them. Lastly, our thoughts are also with Councillor Lewis Jones, or former Councillor Lewis Jones, Councillor Janet Jones and their family at a very difficult time for them. I'd like to pass our best wishes, our thoughts and prayers to them.
Chief Executive, do you have any announcements?
No, thank you, Presiding Member, other than to express the good wishes and sympathies of all officers of the Council to Mrs Peed's family also.
Okay then, if we move on to agenda item 9, this is on page 45, Council Tax Reduction Scheme. I'm not sure who's going to lead the report. Nigel.
Thank you, Presiding Member. This is a standard report that has to be approved every year before the 31st of January. It's got the same content as last year, other than the operating regulations to bring it up to date from 2020. It will ensure that we have in place a council tax reduction scheme that will support people up to 100% in relation to council tax for those who qualify. Our budget allows for it. As I say, it's a standard report. We have to approve it every year by the 31st, and there's no changes from last year. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions or comments around this one? No. In that case, then, the recommendations are on page 47, even. Do we have a mover and seconder for those? Yeah. Okay, can I have a show of hands on those in agreement? Anybody against? Any abstentions? No, thank you. That's unanimous. We'll move on to agenda item 10 then, which is around the petition to stop spraying our towns with glyphosate. So I'll hand over to Rachel. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I know councillors were taking the time to delve into the details of the petition, the additional information available online and the report along with the linked studies and appendices within. So I won't speak too much on the actual report specifically, but compare Torvine and the general issue. Most people think of Roundup as a weed killer that they use in their homes and gardens. Roundup is also commonly used for agriculture and is the most commonly used herbicide in the world. Its main ingredient, being glyphosate, is sprayed on urban areas to prevent or reduce weeds, along with many different crops that people do consume. In agriculture, it's also sprayed on crops before the harvesting to quicken ripening of that crop. So basically, it's on our food, and we are consuming it. The International Agency for Research on Cancer is an intergovernmental agency forming part of the World Health Organization of the United Nations. Its role is to conduct and coordinate research into the causes of cancer. And in March 2015, IARC, so I'm shortening that one down, International Agency of Research on Cancer, classified glyphosate as a probable carcinogenic to humans, which is Group 2A. Just to illustrate other items that we consume on a daily basis that have been deemed probable carcinogenics to humans, and that's when we consume them, mind. IARC has also classified processed meat, e.g. salami, bacon, hot dogs, as causes of cancer, Group 1, and red meat, e.g. lamb, pork and beef, as probable cancer-causing group, which is Group 2, the same as the glyphosate. I think it's important to make sure that people understand that there are lots of carcinogenics around us, potential carcinogenics or probable carcinogenics. Different agencies also set permissible residual amounts of glyphosate that can be consumed by humans without causing noteworthy health risks over a lifetime. Trace amounts have been found in bread, and apparently it's higher in wholemeal, cereal, wine, beer, cookies, and even Ben & Jerry's ice cream. It's even been found in organic products. So there's a book that was lent to us, members, called Whitewash, and on page 59 and 60 it states the measures that America and European agency set permissible amounts of glyphosate that can be consumed. So comparatively, America 1.75 milligrams of glyphosate per kilogram of a person's body weight per day. European Union, it actually says in the book 0.3, but it's now 0.5 milligrams of glyphosate per kilogram of a person's body weight. A kilogram, to be clear, is a similar equivalent weight value to a litre. And so, crucially here, Torvine uses water and glyphosate mixture, which is obviously the glyphosate, and is equivalent to 0.028 milligram. So that's 1.75 America, 0.5 milligram European Union, and we use 0.028 milligram per litre, which is actually sprayed directly to the plant. In essence, the amount that's sprayed on Torvine weeds is less than is deemed safe for a person to consume according to the European Union, and we are not consuming it but spraying it directly to the plant. A study on bees is also included in the report. It highlights the health impact of the bees and how perturbing the bee gut therefore lessens their resilience. For those who drill down to the study submitted by the petitioners, the second paragraph under abstract states, thus glyphosate may affect bacterial symbionts of animals living near agricultural sites, including pollinators such as bees. And obviously we are not an agricultural site, we are an urban area, and again, we don't blanket spray as in agricultural measures. And again, the study there uses 5 milligram per litre, which is 178 times higher than used by our contractors, and 10 milligram per litre, which is 357 times greater than is used by our contractor. In addition, we spray twice a year. Some local councils to us spray as much as 6 times a year. As I said, we spot spray with the technology Weed It that targets green foliage. The superfine spray dries in seconds to prevent runoff into watercourses. Note that we do use handheld devices to treat areas that the technology cannot access easily, such as curbsides, but again, the amount that's actually used is low. We do not blanket spray, which, as I've said, is the agricultural method of distribution. And it is the only effective treatment of knotweed at this time. As advised by APSI in the report put as an appendices, we have reduced the amount that we use in Torvine in our public spaces. I met with petitioners, which is unusual. I did this because I wanted to better understand the data they had provided, and I came away with a greater understanding of the issue, but then sought further answers to the questions I then had. I thank them for their time and patience. It is important to stress that we as councillors represent all residents, and not all will agree with the petitioners. And no one would expect us to make a decision based on unequal data, which would have a detrimental effect on the amenities around us, the appearance and the potential trip hazards to our communities. And again, it's important to note that the governments and bodies that we look to, the Welsh Government and the European Union, continue to endorse this product. In conclusion, I don't dispute that glyphosate has my attention, in that I'm certain my family and I do consume it through the food that we eat. However, I'm not unable to equate the food that we eat as equal to the weeds that we are treating, which is what I've tried to demonstrate through the evidence that's been provided, or information that's been provided to us, is that it is not equal. We all know that alcohol in moderation is a health concern. However, when one drinks a lot of alcohol, the risk health rises significantly. Indeed, the same can be said of air quality and other pollutants in our environments. These studies do not compare apples for apples. The peer review study that I did find by the European Food Safety Authority states the report concludes that glyphosate is unlikely to pose a carcinogenic hazard to humans, and proposes a new safety measure that will tighten the control of glyphosate residue in food. We need more studies, I admit that it would be useful to have more, but it would be useful as well to actually specifically explore urban usage, because a lot of the information out there is more agricultural studies. But even with those agricultural studies that are of a higher percentage than what we use in an urban area, there are still the words could, possible, might. There's no conclusive evidence out there to say that it is. The report, in my view, is comprehensive and fair, and in its conclusion, and at this time, based on the information and evidence we currently have, I would be minded to focus my attention on agricultural bodies and national governments to whom we take advice on these matters. And then I'll put you over to Rachel and Andrew.
Thank you, Cabinet Member. It's just to recommend to Council, obviously you've heard from the Cabinet Member on the whole swathe of research that has been done. The report is sort of like try to be balanced with the pros and the cons, and the evidence that has been presented both by the petitioners but also from the agencies that we look to in terms of giving us advice. I said it is a probable carcinogenic. We do take the concerns of the petitioners very seriously and have engaged in lots of correspondence with them. But the recommendation to Council today is that we continue to use the current contract, which will continue to use glyphosate as outlined in the report, but as we agreed when it went to scrutiny in 2018, to be continually reviewed, to keep an eye on best practice, to engage with Welsh Government, APSI and all the agencies doing the work, so if things do change, then we would respond accordingly, and you have our assurance of that.
Okay, the members have opened it up for question and comments. Do I have anybody? Dave Thomasford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. with all the serious health concerns and doubts that surround the use of glyphosate, I would like to see this council to conduct a straight-out ban of the use of glyphosate, just like councils in Hammersmith, Fulham in West London, Shaftesbury, Glastonbury and Bury. It would be a much better idea to join those councils and completely ban it. Let's just go back to using conventional methods that we know to be safe for our operators, our residents and pets alike here in Torvine, instead of taking unnecessary risks by continuing to use glyphosate. Surely the cost of conventional methods outweigh the use of glyphosate. I mean, after all, you cannot put a price on human life.
Okay, Councillor Burnett.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I sat on the scrutiny with this, and it really was scrutinised. We have limited resources, and if it had to go to manpower, somebody said about grubbing up the weeds, it's just not feasible at all. I've always had a concern of what we're putting in our atmospheres. And when I was working for ASDA, I always had a concern how much detergents, bleaches, caustic sodas that we're all responsible for, that we put down our sinks on a daily basis. I don't see anybody questioning that or looking at the supermarkets or these companies putting out all these caustic, nasty things. If you read a bottle, do not inhale, wear gloves, wear a mask, and that's on the shelves in supermarkets, and that's a great concern to me. And when I'm a gardener, we kill pests or whatever, you go to any supermarket, any DIY centre, all your nasty sprays are there, not regulated. Nobody's at the supermarkets protesting, or the B&Qs of this world selling all these uncontrolled substances, yet the council is being scrutinised not to use it, and we're trying to work within a fixed budget, but I don't see anybody protesting outside B&Q when they go and buy thousands every week in B&Qs, thousands of gallons of the nasty sprays and whatever. I mean, I bought a tin of paint yesterday. I might not even use it because do not inhale, wear gloves. And it was frightening what actually the content is in there. And I don't see anybody protesting about everybody selling to us. We're responsible people here, yet we will all go out, we will all buy it, we'll all put down our sinks and down our toilets and back garden sinks for the caustics. But nobody's protesting against that. And to me, I think that's a bigger threat to the environment than the glyphosate at the moment. If we could be regulated, if we could be controlled what we use, it'd be a different world, I'm sure.
Okay, anybody else? Yeah, we've got Hugh and then...
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also sat on the Clean Air Scrutiny Committee, and we did discuss this at length. We came to the conclusion that it was the safest option to control the weeds in the borough. But that in mind, we did comment that if there was a better solution in the future, that should be explored, and that's already been mentioned with best practice and ongoing research. That something may come up at a later date that we wouldn't have no need to use glyphosate, and I would welcome that. But I've also noted that the executive member has mentioned the agricultural use and dosage compared to what we are doing, and I'm quite assured that that's at a safe level.
Hugh?
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. I too was on the Oversight and Scrutiny Committee meeting that looked into the usage of this. I spoke to some of the representatives from Friends of the Earth this morning, and we've got a couple of issues here. We've got the treatment of the weeds within the built-up areas, and we've got treatment of invasive alien species like Japanese knotweed, which we have to try and eradicate. The Friends of the Earth representatives don't have an issue with the treatment of the Japanese knotweed, where the stems are cut and the chemical is applied inside the stems of the plant. As part of the Oversight and Scrutiny and the subsequent demonstration of the equipment that the exec member arranged, it was said that the method of application of the glyphosate was only in minimal quantities, and did not allow for vapour or spread of the chemical when the weeds were being treated. What I wanted to ask is whether the exec member and the council officers had actually seen the video that was shot by Friends of the Earth representatives in May of this year, which showed when the treatment is actually being undertaken that this is not the case. As the assurances we were given on the committee were that only minimal quantities of this was being used to treat the weeds. But I wanted to know if they'd seen that video, which showed that it wasn't being applied just in the small quantities that we'd been assured that it had been.
Fiona, do you want to come back on that?
Coming on that point, there's not a video, but there is a photo. There is a photo that I responded to immediately, and it is hence why I then had a demonstration, and councillors had a demonstration as well, just to explain that, to make sure that I felt reassured that the application was appropriate, because we had been explained to us by the contractors in that overview and scrutiny committee, and they said about the technology being spot treated, but they do use, as I've stated in my opening remarks, that we do use handheld devices in order to spray on certain areas.
And I think Andrew's going to come in on.
Just to say, members, we have received a photograph, so I haven't seen a video. Had there been a video, I think it would have provided us with a little bit more information about the spraying method. But the photograph shows a spray sort of from the machine going down to a curbside. But as a snapshot, to me, that's just demonstrates the spot spraying technique. So it'll be a spray where there's a weed, another spray where there's a weed, and the photograph was taken at the point where the spray was happening. So we haven't seen a video.
Leader?
Thank you. Thank you for the report and for the contribution of both officers and Fiona as the exec member on this. I think it's right that we look into this. My inner spirit would rather we didn't use many chemicals at all in life, but my pragmatic side supports the approach that's been outlined by Fiona today, because the consequences of not using a safe and controlled amount of this substance would seem to me to cause greater impact than perhaps would be apparent. More weeds doesn't just equal unsightliness and more weeds on our pavements and our streets. It would also result in more structural damage, which is already a problem, let's face it. Our pavements and our streets are already in less of a good condition than we want them to be in an ideal world. That would result in more trips and falls. It would result in our communities looking worse. Councillor Bevan mentioned knotweed, and that's already a problem. So I just think pragmatically we have to take a middle route. I'm glad the report says that we'll keep things under review. As Councillor Evans says, I think if a magic better alternative comes along in the future, and hopefully these things will, as the science progresses, then I think we should look to use that. But I think that the only sort of sensible and pragmatic thing to do is to carry on using this in a very controlled way, in very low concentrations and low quantities as we do. I would say I was very impressed by the depth that scrutiny members went into. I've looked at the minutes and watched parts of the scrutiny, and also the efforts that were made to get the equipment to the park to demonstrate using water, I hasten to add, to demonstrate that in the park. I think that shows us trying to demonstrate to members that what's being done is appropriate and not done in a way that sort of trite or just seeks to dismiss the concerns that people have. I have seen examples of other councils, but I believe that we've already done much of what some of those other councils do. And I think it's key that when you look at other councils, the word that's used is restricted, not banned, in almost all the examples I've seen. And we already do restrict it by using the lower concentrations, by using it in a very, very targeted way. I think chemicals are a part of our everyday lives. Many of them have been mentioned. I think what's key is that we use them in a controlled and safe manner and use as little as we can. So really I think there is a sensible approach being being proposed here by the officers and by the executive member, and I'd very much support that.
Okay, members, does anybody else wish to speak on this?
Thank you. The executive member mentioned the IARC. I've read an awful lot of documents and pages over the last couple of days on this, and one of the things that the IRAC concluded was that there was strong evidence for genotoxicity. Now, genotoxicity is the ability of chemicals to damage the genetic information within a cell, resulting in mutations which may lead to malignancies. There was an awful lot of other literature that I read that's really concerning, and as my colleague sitting next to me, Councillor Thomas, has said, there are many councils in England that are reducing and banning the use of glyphosate. In fact, our neighbours, the French, they've banned the use of all non-agricultural pesticides, and the French public, are not able to buy weed killer or insecticides from shops and garden centres over there. So, you know, their children are not being put in harm by what could be harmful pesticides. And I think that's what a good government should be doing, is putting the well-being of its residents at heart. So I'm going to move an amendment to the report, and the amendment will be remove the wording at 13.1 and replace with that Council agrees to cease using glyphosate-based products for weed control in Torfaen within the next 6 months, and that a letter advising of this be sent to the petitioner.
Okay, I'm going to ask, we're going to need it in writing, so if you have it in writing, that's okay. Bring it up and we'll go from there.
Well said. I'll say this.
Okay, so first off, we're going to need a seconder for the amendment. Yeah. Okay, so if we take the amendment first, and then we'll go from there, really. So this, I'll read it out again for clarity. We're replacing the wording at 13.1 and with that Council agrees to cease using glyphosate-based products for weed control in Torfaen within the next 6 months, and that a letter advising of this be sent to the petitioner. So if I can have a show of hands, all those in favour of this motion, so changing the word into a ban. A ban. Oh, sorry. We'll debate the amendment, yeah, sorry. Just before we start, do we want to debate the amendment?
Yes, please.
Right, okay.
It's not necessarily debate, I just want to ask a question. Do they want to include in the amendment what they would replace it with? Because everybody's talking about facts and figures and what they've read, etc., etc. If they have done the facts and figures, what will they suggest as a replacement?
And that is why there's a 6-month thing in there, so that can be investigated by officers.
So would they like to amend their motion to include that officers investigate those matters? Because at the moment the best considered ones are the chemicals currently being used in the small doses that are being used.
And if you're happy for that amendment to be altered, I'm fully agreed.
Okay, if we have the debate a minute, and then we'll come back to this issue. Okay, Fiona?
Just to add that scrutiny did look through the options, so those options already exist and were thoroughly debated in the challenges. The additional CO2 that would be used, as we have a wider workforce, we'd have more vehicles. The fact that even scrubbing out could leave a certain amount of metal particulate in the environment as the brushes break down. That vinegar changes the acidity of the soil. So the information is available. I believe it was a nearly 3-hour meeting that members can view on the public website, as well as the reports with it.
If I go to next, did you want to talk on this one or after we deal with this one?
Can I just ask?
Yes, you will, yeah. Just wanted to check because you indicated first, so I see. Right, okay, I've got Stuart, then Hugh, then Peter.
One very simple...
Just a point of order, please. I was allowed to speak after Councillor Clark, and the Constitution says once the person that has raised the motion that debate ceases, is my understanding.
It's at my discretion, so. My intention with this is to let everybody speak who wishes to, let you close the debate, go to a vote on this, go back to, if it fails, back to substantive. If it doesn't, then clearly we'll...
Hopefully you've taken direction, Jessica.
Okay.
I'm not comfortable with glyphosate in the slightest personally, but there's one application of glyphosate which you can't ignore, and this motion is preposterous in that sense, is you can't deal with Japanese knotweed. And if you ban it, you can't deal with Japanese knotweed. How do we deal with that?
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. That Councillor Ashley's just raised the exact same point. I was going to mention that the petition is calling for a cease in the usage across the board, and I'm not a big fan of this stuff either, but we've been given assurances. I mean, as you said, in the scrutiny, we've spent 3 hours discussing this. We were told that there is no other effective treatment available on the market currently for treating Japanese knotweed. So I couldn't support the motion in its current form because it's calling for an immediate cease. If the motion was amended to say continued usage for the treatment of the Japanese knotweed, but exploring alternatives, should a new one be brought to market in terms of chemical treatment, then that should be given consideration by this council. I can say, as the exec member alluded to, we did look at alternatives at length in terms of treatment, you know, whether it was handheld burners, that kind of thing. That would be very, very labour intensive. The effectiveness of them is short term for the weeds growing back, and it would represent a significant increased cost to this council. So in light of the emerging evidence about the links to cancer, then I think we should keep an open mind on the looking at alternatives for weed treatment in the built-up areas. That said, there is no alternative option for the Japanese knotweed at the moment.
Okay, got Peter.
Thank you. I'm just going to repeat really what I'm chair of the Cleaner Committee, and as a lot of my committee members have said, we looked at this at length, and I'm really disappointed this amendment's come forward. We looked at all the options, we looked at all the alternatives. This council often, complains that scrutiny isn't listened to. They were listened to on this occasion. We looked at all the options. We made recommendations that we're going to try and minimise the use. We're going to keep an eye on the evidence. It's as the leader said and the cabinet member said, we're taking a very cautious approach with this, and I think we should support the motion as it originally stood.
Thanks, Chair. I share concerns about the chemicals we use, but how are the English councillors getting rid of all the issue of the weeds? Is there something we can learn from those? But the Japanese knotweed is also a concern because it has an effect when people are selling houses. They can't get mortgages. And if this is the only way you have to control Japanese knotweed, well, as long as we are sort of trying to compare how we do it, I think we have to go with it.
Fiona?
Thank you. Yes, it's a good point that you make there. I think it's important to note that within the APSI report it says those councils are reportedly banning the use of glyphosate-based products. In addition to that, and it came through in the scrutiny that was held, that Bristol had banned it, but then they reintroduced it. So it's the challenge of what else do we use? And as much as 6 months may seem a reasonable amount of time, I certainly wouldn't say that's a reasonable amount of time. I've been looking at this for a lot longer than 6 months as to alternatives, if that was the way this council chose to go. But I would obviously urge caution, because the consequences will be that our visual amenities will be drastically affected. So that's not just about how we feel about our communities and the fact that they're weed-free and hopefully litter-free, but also that how do tourists then feel about visiting Torfaen? How do businesses decide to actually place themselves here? There are more factors about the way that our communities look than just one thing.
Okay, anybody else to speak on this? Dave?
Right, so I've been on a bit of a journey with this really, because my starting point was where everyone else was really, where the concern was around, as soon as you hear the word cancer and all the hazards related to it, you kind of think, oh bloody hell, you know. So that was my starting point, and I was initially sort of predisposed to be resistant to glyphosate. Add in the fact that you've got Monsanto, which undoubtedly is an unethical big company, but I think the scientific situation is awfully complicated, and I think that needs to be stated. And I've done my own bit of reading, and the reason I'm speaking today is to justify and demonstrate to both people who are proponents and anti-glyphosate that I personally have gone to lengths to try and at least inform my own view. You know, when you look at the argument, you can see that there are vested interests in all sorts of directions, whether it's pro or anti. I think that the IARC, I think that I read somewhere that they do have actual links with victims or proposed victims of glyphosate. So there are, it's far from clear-cut, and there are arguments from the side of alternatives and companies that would seek to take the place of glyphosate. So it's a very murky kind of picture. But if you look at the pure science of it, and I think that's what we need to do, the overwhelming consensus is that it does not cause cancer. You've got the European, the US, the Japanese regulatory agencies who are in charge of determining the hazards relating to chemicals such as glyphosate. They all determine that it is safe for use. I found studies that looked at, in animals, it hurts me, but they tested on rats, and they found that you could administer 4,800 milligrams per kilogram's weight in a rat before, and still see no toxicity. And we're talking about 0.028 milligrams per litre. So to put that in context, we're practically talking about homeopathic levels of dilution. So I just think we need to look at the science of it personally. Overwhelming evidence is that a link cannot be proven. My argument is very much the argument made by others that there has to be an alternative, because the alternative is very expensive. We need to have a feasible alternative if we're going to say, right, we're going to cease using it. Because, Japanese knotweed, I think an understated argument is that the invasive nature of Japanese knotweed and other species on native species can have a detrimental impact on local biodiversity. I think that has been understated, and I think that needs to be made clear, that this is the reason why we're doing this. And I think if members think that ceasing glyphosate will lead to less complaints, or fewer complaints rather, I think they need to have a reality check, because I think actually, if we do that, you will be facing a periodic bout of complaints about weeds here, left, right and centre, Japanese knotweed left, right and centre, and then you'll be complaining about those. So it's the lack of an alternative is the reason why I'm backing this today. So.
Okay, Jason?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm leaning on an amendment to Councillor Haynes' proposal in agreement with Councillor Bevan, in that we should consider the ban of the chemical except for where it's directly injected into knotweed. So I would suggest that spraying the chemical is considered rather than a complete ban. I refer to the APSI comment. There was a question in it that caught my eye to state whether local authorities would be able to cope with paying any damages awarded against them. There are thousands of cases going through courts at the moment, with obviously some high profile in the media. It would take one of those cases to be successful here in the UK, and potentially in Torfaen, and I think that the level of damages that will be awarded to a successful claimant will pretty much put this council on its knees. So the risk of not banning this chemical, with the exception of Japanese knotweed direct injection, for me, overweighs keeping it going. Thank you.
And take some advice a minute on which order is best to... Right, okay. So Jason, I'll need that in writing. I'm going to ask Councillor Haynes if she's happy for that amendment, to accept that amendment as her amendment. And if that's the case, okay, so then we're still just dealing with the one amendment.
Chair, it's basically my understanding regarding that basically because there's an amendment, but we've got to deal with that first. If it falls, then another amendment can be put forward, if you like, as outlined in regarding...
It's up to Councillor Haynes. If Councillor Haynes said, no, I don't want to accept that, then we would have to deal with them as stacked.
What is now right, it becomes my amendment.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so once we have it in writing, we will continue with the debate then, I think. Yeah, if I could, yeah, that'd be brilliant.
No, I don't think Councillor Kemp's got it. Can I? Sorry, Councillor Kemp. Councillor Kemp, just for clarification, as I understand it, Councillor Haynes is withdrawing her amendment, so there is no amendment from Councillor Haynes. Councillor O'Connell's amendment has replaced that amendment.
Okay, I'm going to continue the debate just so everyone gets their chance to speak. So, because I've got Nick, who's indicated. If you want to.
Yeah, apologies for that. Actually, Jason, Mr. Connell, I was going to bring this up as the exact point that I wanted to bring up on page 82. It is the comment, and the concern is very, very much around. So I don't know whether you want to bring that emotion and then have comments on it, because this is to support that. And it was the point I was actually going to make. I don't know what's
As this is now the amendment, I think it's fine to make them now. Because
right, okay. I want to bring Council's attention particularly to page 82, to the APSE comment, because I think it is very, very succinct in its advice. I will very selectively pull from that. Unfortunately, there's no right or wrong answer to the question, is it safe to continue to use glyphosate products? And the very realistic danger that there is the issue of successful claims in court, and that the continued use of glyphosate has led to cancer, together with thousands more cases awaiting judgment. There's also the concern that these claims are now appearing in several countries across the globe, and if such a case were brought to the UK, whether local authorities would be able to cope with paying any damages awarded against them, as well as the cost of finding alternatives. Equally, now that we have seen this link proven or not, then morally, should we continue using a product which, although highly effective and affordable, could potentially pose a threat to our residents? This is a concern for us as a council. It goes on to say, in fairness, that it appears the only realistic option at the moment, until affordable and effective alternatives can be found, is to use glyphosate products as sparingly as possible and away from high public footfall areas. And I think that comes to the nub of the problem that we have as a council, and I very much strongly support if this amendment came up, and I think it's I would urge people to pause for a minute, use it for the knotweed, but to pause at the moment for a moratorium until we actually properly look at our response. And the question I'd like to ask the council as a question is, have we actually put anything in place to mitigate any potential claims against us as a council, should any claims come against us?
I'm not sure if anybody would like to come in on that, Nigel.
we wouldn't have put anything specifically in place in relation to that question, though.
Just sorry to emphasise to members, you've been told the dilution or the concentrate of glyphosate is within the water. We have a contract in place where they have to submit their due diligence for chemical management, their health and safety practices for protection of employees. That is monitored through contract management, through Andrew and his team. And if there was any such as photo evidence or anything that came to light which meant that they were not in line with contracts, we call them in, and we did so immediately on the back of that photo, because to ensure that they are doing everything they can. So we protect ourselves through our contract management, through ensuring that actually the dilutions, the concentrate that we are using is far, far less than what you've been reading about or hearing about in terms of, the probable cause of cancer. So in line with guidelines, which we are following, it's all within our contract management to ensure the protection of the operatives who are using it. You'll note, I think Sandra's mentioned it to me just now, all of the claims that have come forward are not from the public, they are from operatives who have been exposed to this chemical, but in significantly higher concentrates than what our operatives are exposed to. Hundreds of times more than what we're exposing our operatives, and we're ensuring safe standards of work and practice, just like we do with any contract where we might have claims coming in for anything, trips, falls, halves, hazardous chemicals for our cleaners on a daily basis, which has been mentioned. So all of that is done properly to protect this council.
Sorry, can I just come back on that, if I might? So are you suggesting then that if there are any claims against the contractor and not against us as a council? And can I confirm from what you're just saying that we as a council have made no provision for any potential claims against us?
I think Nigel's already answered the question on provision of claims against us. What we do through all our contracts is to ensure that they are following the health and safety guidelines, and we monitor them on that.
So would any potential claim be against us or against them then?
That would have to be something, if a claim could forward, would be managed through a court of law and legal process. We wouldn't be able to answer that at that moment. We wouldn't know what the claim would be, and so we can't answer that.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. If you permit me, I'd like to ask Rachel and Andrew a question. The degree of reassurances that we've been given as councillors is partly down to the concentrations of levels of the chemical that's actually being used and the method of its application. Now, you mentioned that there's safeguards in place. The assurances that we've been given depend on the contractor actually doing what they say that they're doing. I wanted to ask you both in terms of the monitoring of them, because obviously representatives from Friends of the Earth felt that the method of application was not in keeping with what's been prescribed to us in terms of it being very small quantities, not allowing for any spray of the chemical. In terms of that enforcement and monitoring of the contractors, what frequency are they actually
Sorry, point of order. Sorry, Hugh.
monitored?
I just want to jump in. We're debating the motion as opposed to the amendment at the moment, when we're supposed to be debating the amendment.
I think at this point I'm happy to just take the debate. So, if we let Hugh ask this question, I think Andrew and Rachel have pretty much already answered it, but if they just want to reiterate, and then if Liz is happy, then we'll move to a close now.
I think it's an important point, Madam Presiding Officer, because the frequency of monitoring, if it's not felt to be sufficient, then perhaps we can amend the motion to have more rigorous checks and controls in place of the contractor to ensure the monitoring of how the chemical is sprayed.
Just to say, Councillor, the contractor provides us with a schedule of times when they will be spraying. The street scene officers are out and about keeping an eye on those. The contractor is required by law to keep a full record of the quantities used and the dilution used in all sites, and they submit that to us then as part of their monitoring.
There's no immediate oversight by council officers when they're undertaking the spraying?
We wouldn't be following a contractor around all the time whilst they're doing their work. We might as well have done the job ourselves. then, because that would just be inefficient. We have employed, through our procurement process, for ourselves and also Bronavon, a contractor who is authorised, accredited, and has passed all the safety tests on using these chemicals. So it's like we do for any contracted service. We monitor it, we have systems in place. If there should be any signs of breaches, we react immediately, we ask questions, we call them in and we review. But we wouldn't be following all our contractors, of which we have multiple around this authority, to check up on their work all the time.
I'm sorry, but that response suggests it's an all or nothing approach. In terms
I think
no, hang on. In terms of monitoring, when the street scene go out, there's spot check monitoring. You don't have to monitor them constantly 100% of the time. Other areas of the council will undertake spot checks, like a mystery shopper type approach, and they won't know when you're coming up to do those spot checks.
And as Andrew said, the street scene operatives, our charge hands, are out there on a daily basis in the patch. We know where they're going to be going, and they can then look out and report back anything. So they are our eyes and ears on the ground monitoring the contract. That is in place.
Okay, right, I think that's been answered. Right. I go ask Jason if he wishes to close, but you can hand over to Liz if you want to. Okay.
You have the motion.
So you don't want to say anything else? You're happy to?
No, just that I support, the amendment that is unfortunately now classed as my amended motion. I would also like to call a recorded vote, please.
Do I have 6, I think I need for recorded? Yeah, okay. So it'll be a recorded vote.
Sorry, just to be clear, Councillor Haynes, you've withdrawn your motion and agreed to it be replaced by Councillor. Him amending your motion, is that okay? It changes the way we do the business. Yeah, is that okay? All right, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, however it's happening, I'll just read this out now so we're all clear while we're getting ready for the recorded vote. Okay, so we'll be removing the words in at 13.1 and replacing with: the Council agrees to cease using sprayed glyphosate-based products for weed control in Torvine, with the exception of direct injection to Japanese knotweed, within the next 6 months, unless a letter advising of this be sent to the petitioner. So if you're in favour, it'll be for. Against, obviously, we'll be against. So.
Okay, Councillor Ashley.
As it stands, against.
Hugh Bevan.
As it stands, against.
Ron Burnett.
Against.
James away. Richard Clark.
Against.
Leonard Constance away. Veronica. Councillor Crick.
Against.
Fiona Cross.
Against.
David Daniels.
Against.
Giles Davis.
Against.
Kathy's away. Stephen Evans.
Against.
Stuart Evans.
As it stands, against.
Joe Gordon. Elizabeth Haynes.
For.
John Haller.
Against.
Anthony Hunt.
Against.
Gaynor James.
Against.
Gwyn Jenkins.
For.
Mike Jeremiah. Alan Jones.
Against.
Faye Jones.
Against.
Janet Jones.
Against.
Nicholas Jones.
For.
Peter Jones.
Against.
Robert Kemp.
Against.
Sue Malson.
Against.
Raymond Mills. Away. Jason O'Connell.
For.
Richard Overton.
As it stands, against.
Mandy Owen. Norma Parish. Left. Jessica Powell.
Against.
Sorry.
Kelly Preston. Emma Rapier.
Against.
Rose Seaborn.
Against.
Louise Shepherd.
For.
Alan Slade. Get away. Christopher Tew.
For.
Colette Thomas.
Against.
Dave Thomas.
For.
Neil Waite.
Against.
Raymond Williams. David Yowell.
Against.
Okay, right, there was 7 for, 30 against, no abstentions, so that amendment's fallen. Okay, so now we're now back to the original recommendation, which is on page 63. So, before we go to that one, does anybody else wish to speak or anything now, or are we happy to move and second and go to that?
Sorry, just a quick question on that. There was from the answers of what people were saying, that there was a clear appetite for a better worded motion to go through, because I think it was the, I believe it was the, yes, as it stood.
Six people said as it stood, so that makes it.
Okay, but whether there was to be a debate on a changing on the wording, is that a possibility, or have we?
In addition to the actual...
Hang on a minute, because I did agree before we went to this one that if people wanted to speak afterwards, I would let them. So, I stand by that statement. But if Nick finishes his point, then Fiona, and then we'll...
Yes, I would like to actually mention that I wasn't quibbling. I was asking a question as to whether it was possible. So quibbling it's not semantics, it's not quibbling. I object to that, sorry.
I just want to draw people to the actual the report and the fact that we've said that we will continually review this. This is not going to end as of today. This is going to be continually reviewed, which from the as it stands that the few members did state should allay their concerns. I've already made the point. Scrutiny looked at this with the evidence they had for nearly 3 hours. I regularly read reports on this because it is, and I understand, an emotive subject for many people. Officers have spent a great deal of time looking at into the alternatives, and it will continue, no doubt, into the future. So if that assurance would help members to then move this forward, then you have it off me.
Okay, so basically the situation is everybody's welcome to bring another amendment, but it might be advisable to think, as it's under review, to bring it up at another council meeting, I think, at this point. Okay, so...
Can I just come in very quickly on that? In the scrutiny, we looked at adopting a borough-wide approach. So, in other words, if we did away with the use of glyphosate, what are the other alternatives we could bring in, and we explored those in length in the scrutiny. But it's interesting to note in the report today, under the ABSI comments, it actually makes a recommendation. It says, as my colleague here Nick read out earlier, it appears that the only realistic option at the moment, until an affordable and effective alternatives can be found to its use, glyphosate products as sparingly as possible and away from high public footfall areas. Now, the committee, when we met, did not consider that as an option in terms of partial continued usage in the borough in relatively lower footfall areas.
I think this again will come under either bringing an amendment or considering it when it comes up for review. Because I think, again, we're in the same situation. It's the same basic issue.
Okay, so on that basis then, can I propose an amendment to the wording that we stop using it in areas that are deemed to be high public footfall areas?
If you want to submit it to me in writing, yeah. I'm happy to take that. So long as somebody seconds it, obviously.
Are you happy with that?
Do I have a seconder for that amendment before I make you write it out? Okay. Okay, so if we just wait a moment then, I'll get it in writing.
So it's the adoption of...
Okay, right, members. I'm going to read out the amendment, and then we will take a vote on that, and we will see where we go. Okay, so the amended recommendation would be that Council agrees the continued use of glyphosate-based products for weed control in Torfaen other than in high public footfall areas, whilst monitoring the development of alternatives for the future, and that a letter advising of this be sent to the petitioner. Okay? So, we've had a mover and a seconder, so I'm going to take a show of hands, all those in favour of this amendment. I'll need 6 people to indicate. Yep, okay. So, just a reminder, if you're in favour of this amendment, you're voting for. If you're against and want to go back to the original, you're against.
Councillor Stuart Ashley.
Against.
Councillor Hugh Bevan.
For.
Councillor Ronald Burnett. Richard Clark.
Against.
Veronica Crick.
Against.
Fiona Cross.
Against.
David Daniels.
Against.
Giles Davis.
Against.
Stephen Evans.
Against.
Stuart Evans.
For.
Joanne. Elizabeth Haynes.
For.
John Hawler.
Against.
Anthony Hunt.
Against.
Gaynor James.
Against.
Gwyn Jenkins.
For.
Mike Jeremiah.
For.
Alan Jones.
Against.
Faye Jones.
Against.
Janet Jones.
For.
Nicholas Jones.
For.
Peter Jones.
Against.
Robert Kemp.
Against.
Sue Malson.
Against.
Jason O'Connell.
For.
Richard Overton.
For.
Mandy Owen.
Against.
Jessica Powell.
Against.
Kelly Preston. Emma Rapier.
Against.
Rose Seaborn.
Against.
Louise Shepherd. Alan Slade. Oh, he's not here. Christopher Tew.
For.
Colette Thomas.
Against.
Dave Thomas.
For.
Neil Waite.
Against.
Raymond Williams. And David Yowell.
Against.
Okay, so the results of the votes were 13 for, 24 against, no abstentions, so the amendment falls. So we're back to the original motion. We have a mover and seconder. We'll just have a show of hands, I think, at this point, because we've obviously been through. Okay, so can I have a show of hands? All those in favour of the original recommendation as it states in the agenda? Okay, anybody against? Any abstentions? Okay, that's passed. So we're moving on, eventually, to item 11, which is the solar farm capital funding at Teacork. This is on page 87 of the agenda.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Member. I'm really pleased to bring this report here to Council today to seek approval that the solar farm project be included within the Council's capital programme with a value of £2.45 million. Earlier this month, Cabinet approved the final business case to allow commencement of all the procurement packages, and we come to Council today to commit the capital to the scheme. I think Council can be assured that due diligence has been done on this project, a lot of market engagement, intelligence and costings from other similar projects that have been gathered to inform the financial model that is presented to you today. I'm not going to lie and inform Council that this project is the solution to all our financial woes. It would be brilliant if it was, but it is a starter for 10, even a small one. It is estimating a very conservative and small return financially at the moment, some £23,000 per year for the 35 years of the project. However, finance shouldn't be the only driver for a project such as this. This is a unique and innovative project for the Council, which aims to generate enough electricity to power 982 homes and sell to the grid of Britain, while small, still a revenue stream back into the authority. It is also important members realise that this is a trial project, our first one of such an environmental scheme such as this, which we can then learn for other projects going into the future. Last year in this chamber, you members declared a climate change emergency. This is being discussed in scrutiny next week, but what I would suggest is what more telling and powerful project indicates your commitment to such an issue as building our own solar farm, reduce grid emissions by 48,000 CO2 tonnes over the course of the project. I think Council needs to be assured that this project will not progress and no capital expenditure incurred until the final due diligence has been done on the return of all the procurement packages, and that the financial and environmental benefits are rerun based on the information provided by the various contracts that we'll be awarding. So it will be reviewed and reviewed again. Cabinet have also made a commitment that should the model demonstrate a zero or negative return, which I really hope it wouldn't, a special emergency meeting would be called to decide on whether or not the project actually proceeds. If the procurement process returns a positive project, then the project will go ahead in line with the capital funding we'd hope to be committing today. I think to remind members, this is an environmental scheme with the potential to bring a small but long-term income stream into the authority. The scheme, both outline and final business case, have been the subject of in-depth scrutiny by Cleaner Scrutiny Committee, and we thank them for their recommendations, because that really helped officers then look at the business case before going to Cabinet both times. And they were supportive. This is an opportunity for us to demonstrate our commitment to climate change and to do something innovative and different. Only a handful of councils across Wales are doing this, so let's us be one of the leaders, and I therefore commend the report to Council.
Thank you. Members, any questions or comments on this one? Dave?
Thank you, Chair. I have grave concerns about this project, as I did when I sat on the first scrutiny committee. For me, the business plan is flawed. The numbers for the project are on a knife edge, and there are just too many what-ifs for this project to ever be a success or a benefit for our residents. I believe this tick-box exercise for the Council to feel good about themselves with regards to climate change will ultimately cost this Council and Torfaen taxpayers in the long run. My advice to this Council would be to scrap this project before it ends up costing us, and if we truly want to make a positive impact on the environment with regards to climate change, then we should plant more trees on that site instead. This will improve our carbon footprint and also enhance biodiversity.
Leader? Fiona first and then...
I know that Councillor Thomas has raised the issue of trees in the past. This has been explored. I think it's really important that members are clear what this site was. It was a tip pre-asbestos. So it's got all sorts of nasties there. Actually, Japanese knotweed won't even grow in the most toxic areas of that site. That's how bad the level of toxicity has been in the past. In terms of trees growing there, it's very difficult to get trees to actually to take hold in the whole site. And comparatively, it's been looked in, and it's only an estimate, the solar farm would generate a savings of the CO2 by a third more than what trees would anyway if they were put over the lifetime of the solar farm. It's an area that obviously I have an interest in, but the actual solar farm is bound to bring us more benefits. I'd also like to put a point of the fact of how innovative we're being as a council. Yes, there are risks to doing something like this, but this is exactly the right decision that we should be making, and the area that we should be going into in terms of how we protect the future of our children and how we generate energy in a safe and clean way. And if we're not the first to step out there and say, well, this is how it's done, others can't follow. So I commend the move to actually produce the solar farm.
Leader?
Thank you. Given the figures that we've just had outlined to us, I think we've just been debating something that's a potential harm. I'll tell you what's a definite harm is if climate change continues and takes shape, that will be a definite harm to our residents and the residents of other areas, both of Wales and the wider world. So I think the figures here are striking, a potential to 21% offset of our energy emissions, 48,140 tonnes of CO2, and the potential to bring in a small profit to the borough whilst testing and leading on renewable energy. Yes, there are some ifs on this. That's why this commissions further studies. If those studies come back and answer the what ifs, then great. If they don't, there's a commitment to bring it back to Cabinet, as I understand. And indeed, I agree with the idea of planting trees, but as Fiona said, this isn't the place to do that. We can do it in other places, but I don't think it's an either or. I think both of those things are things that we have to do if we're going to take seriously our commitments to climate change. It's all very easy for us to stand up in this council and to declare a climate change emergency as we've done. I'd hate for us to do that and then say no to any possible solutions or mitigations to that because they don't entirely fit in with what we want. I think that would be that would be an act of complacency bordering on hypocrisy. So I believe this is potentially a good scheme. If the figures come back as we hope they will, it will make the council a small amount of money whilst going a small way to discharging our obligations to future generations in regards to tackling climate change. So I'm very much in favour of this report.
Okay, I've got Hugh and then Jason.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. I welcome some of the initiatives that have been taken here. I've been banging on about solar for I don't know how many years. I believe the council could go further. I think we've missed opportunities, there possibilities for having solar panels on majority of council-owned buildings and schools. I welcome this. Solar was considered to be not really cost effective because the lifespan of the panels, the capacity drops off over a number of years, and they had to take about 20 years to have what they call the payback period to recoup the initial costs. But as over the years the cost of the panels has come down, the efficiencies have increased, payback periods now are in about 5 years, 5.5 years. So that capital expenditure is well. I'm happy that we're doing that, and I'm happy we are doing something, as the leader said, to address the concerns that we've got about climate issues. I welcome his input about planting trees. I agree with what Councillor O'Connell said as well about the need for planting more trees. I agree with the exec member that this is not the ideal site for tree planting, as it was a former landfill site for refuse. But that said, will the leader and the exec member give a greater commitment for tree planting in the borough, as they both mentioned that? The tree policy is being revised for Torfaen with a proposal in that to replace trees that are being cut down, which are dead, diseased or dying, with one new tree. But can they go further and to say that they'll give an endorsement to planting 2 new trees where one tree has to be cut down?
Okay, if I let Fiona come back on that.
So the leader and I are both in complete agreement and had conversations on this in the past. We know that the community councils very much would like to work with us in partnership to find the suitable locations for tree planting, and we very much welcome that. And you know from the conversations we've had in the past, Hugh, that this is definitely an area which I have an interest in and have been moving it along. So by all means, tree planting should continue. I think it's important to note, and I say this each time, we have the highest tree canopy in Wales. So I don't want to lose that. I want to keep growing that onwards and developing what we have and not losing the ancient woodlands that we have as well.
Okay, I've got Jason, then Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. We held a very good scrutiny on this, I think, and we produced some very measured recommendations to the Executive, both of which were rejected, of course. But we made some assessment of the business case, and as Councillor Thomas says, it is on a knife edge. So one of the questions that we raised during scrutiny that I don't think was answered fully was, at what point do we say this project is unsustainable? What is the monetary value in which we start losing money, in which it becomes non-viable? And that opens up a wider question then, is what price do we put on this climate emergency? And I don't think anybody who we've spoken to recently has been able to answer that question.
Thank you, Councillor O'Connell. I think when we were debating this with the leader and the executive member, recognising the modelling at the moment, it is conservative. We've deliberately been conservative, not optimistic, with the figures that are in the report in the financial business case. That is why, and it's in this report and in the Cabinet report, if the procurement process comes forward and it is a zero financial gain or a negative, the project goes back to Cabinet to make that policy decision about whether or not the scheme should continue in light of the climate change emergency. I can see the leader. Please, I come as well.
Just to confirm that and add our assurance from a political point of view, if it comes back and it is negative as opposed to neutral positive, then we will take that back through Cabinet then, because that's a legitimate question.
Hey, Stuart.
I sat through the PSB, chaired the PSB scrutiny the other day, as chair is smiling, I think. We sat through that the other day on green infrastructure, and this, in a respect, is what we should be doing everywhere. It's just start, it's not a beginning, and I think it's more important in some respects than making a business case. We should have solar panels everywhere. If you look on the roof of Aldi in Cwmbran, they've got a massive, great installation up there. Every building in the place should have them. I remember going around 10 years ago with a community councillor looking at south-facing roofs in Cwmbran, of which there are a considerable number. The fact that we as a council are demonstrating by using a piece of land which is not really very suitable for putting trees on, because of its previous use, to put this on and demonstrating it, that is probably the use. Like you, I've been banging on for years, that's a wonderful expression, thank you, Hugh, about solar panels, ground effect pumps, heat pumps, etc. This council actually has done all that, and we should be doing one heck of a lot more over the next 20 or 30 years to do, for global emergency. We've got that one coming up. Please make sure you come along to that when we do talk about it, because your input will be very welcome indeed. There's a lot. As we discovered, the few of us that did that the other day, I'm very enlightened, I hope, about that. There's a lot more to this than meets the eye. And as far as tree planting is concerned, I'm sure you noticed a few weeks ago, Cwmbran Community Council, I plugged this for what it's worth, 70,000 trees, and as Hugh said, 2 trees, I suspect, for everyone that's come out. I read that bit in the report the other day. We are the most wooded place in Wales, but if you don't keep planting these trees and you don't keep doing these measures, planting trees, we soon won't be, because it's actually a very important measure. And 70,000 trees, maybe 140,000 trees, everybody should be doing it. I'll plug that for all it's worth, to be quite honest. Thank you.
Okay, I got Dave Daniels and then Sue.
I'm quite reassured around the business case, because it says in the report it's been peer reviewed, and we're using quite conservative figures with a little c around the profit behind it. I think the profit for me is almost a kind of a side benefit, because the obvious benefits are around the reduction in carbon dioxide and doing the right thing, essentially. I think missing from the report, and I've raised it in Cabinet, is the argument around local projects providing more energy security, because I think this is going to be a factor going ahead in the future. We currently get our fossil fuels from quite unstable sources in a number of ways, geopolitical. And I think the more projects that we can have based in the UK and locally, the better. And I hope that this is the start of many, many projects, renewable projects in Wales, because we do have a considerable resource where that's concerned. So I personally welcome this, because I think that the benefits are myriad. I think it's the right thing to do. I'll be voting for this today, so, and I recommend other people do.
Okay, Stu?
Thank you, Chair. It was only yesterday myself and 2 other members were in Street Scenes and Highway quarterly meeting, and we discussed then with the planning department, and Andrew was present, money that's coming from the Welsh Government, that our planning department and highways and street scenes are already looking at planting more trees, i.e. around roundabouts. So as a council we are looking into this, and there's a probability that more trees will be planted within Torfaen.
Okay, I've got Peter Jones next.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Just picking up on the point that Councillor O'Connell made, the Cleaner Scrutiny Committee did look at this in great detail, and we had a meeting last week, and members of the committee did express disappointment that the 2 recommendations they made, one around the financial envelope and one about the risk just falling on neighbourhood services, were rejected. I support this overall, and I'm reassured by the comments Rachel has made about prudence, etc. But I will be having a chat to the Cabinet member about how we handle scrutiny recommendations, because a couple of my members have complained.
Okay, Richard?
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. This is a comment that I should like to make. I raised this at planning when this planning application came before us, and the comment is that I watched a television programme which explained that in the Low Countries they are now rolling out a system of mining former landfill sites, and the reasoning behind this is that before we recycled, we actually threw away many items of value, many assets, metallurgic, plastics, and they're all under the ground, and they can be mined very easily and then recycled, adding additional environmental benefits. I would like to think that this council may in the future be an innovative council, and if we come to the decision of reusing the landfill site again in the future, I was just wondering if this could be considered.
Thank you, Councillor Overton. You are right, there are places around the world where nationally they have decided to open up landfill sites, particularly to pull out precious metals, which are in short supply. This is not something the UK government or Welsh government are intending to do at the moment, given the risk of contamination and exposure, going on the previous debate we just had in the chamber. It wouldn't be something we'd be doing on our own at all. It would be something that only, given what is in our old landfill sites, we'd be doing with others and with regulators and with agencies. So at the moment it's not on the cards on a national agenda, but CO2, renewable, clean, local energy production is, and therefore we do, this is a 35-year project for this site. Who knows what 35 years may bring then in terms of the future.
I got Jason, then Fiona.
Thank you, Chief Officer.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick question on the financial case. Have we considered, instead of borrowing and paying interest, have we considered taking this from reserves so we don't have to pay the interest to improve the business case?
I mean, our reserves levels, would not sustain a hit of that, of that magnitude. It's appropriate to class this as capital expenditure, therefore it's appropriate to borrow and spread it over the life, given the significant scale of what we're talking about in the context of our reserves.
I was going to reiterate what I said earlier to Richard about the site being highly contaminated as well. So I wouldn't. There would be a lot more risks to actually pull up that site in the way that you've suggested. But it is. I have seen the same information as yourself, and I do find it interesting to look into. Thanks.
Okay, if there's no one else indicating, can we have a mover and seconder then for... Yeah. Okay, so recommendations are on page 91 of the agenda. Now, show of hands, all those in favour. Thank you. Anybody against? Any abstentions? Okay, that's been agreed. We're moving on to agenda item 12, which is political balance, committee chairs and membership of committees. And Nancy's going to present a report for us. Morning, members. I have two reports to bring to you this morning. The first one is a straightforward report to advise you of changes in political balance. So the key messages of this report are that Councillor Jason O'Connell has left the Conservative group and has become an independent individual councillor. This has changed the political balance. Appendix A now shows the figures. So 27 Labour group members, 8 independent group members, 4 Conservative group members and 5 individual independent members. This hasn't affected scrutiny chairs, that they remain the same, 3 Labour chairs, 1 independent chair and 1 Conservative chair. But it has made some changes to seats on committees, and they're shown in Appendix B, the changes that are required. I've spoken to the group leaders and some of the individual independent members who've spoken as well, and the changes I've got to report are on planning committee. Richard Overton has stood down from the Conservative group, and Jason O'Connell has taken a seat as part of the Labour vacancies there. On licensing, Nicholas Jones has stood down, and the independent group have nominated Chris Tew to join that committee. And there was a change required on cleaner communities, and the Conservative group have nominated Richard Overton to sit on that committee. So those are the changes that have been given to me. I don't know if anyone else has anything else, any other changes?
Just for information, and it might apply to other groups, the Labour group have people who have volunteered to go onto the planning committee, but because of the ruling that members cannot sit on the committee if there's already a member of the ward sitting on the committee, be them the same party or not, those names aren't able to go forward. So I'm proposing, with my executive member hat on as planning, that I write to the Welsh ministers and advise them that, subject to your good thoughts today, that this is a nonsensical ruling, given as well, members will be aware that we are reduced to 40 members at the next election. Pontypool becomes Pontypool already is a super seat, but it becomes a super seat in terms of members. So you will have 4 current individual wards as 1 ward, so you're automatically ruling out a number of people for planning committee. And as the reviewing body seems to be favouring multi-member wards throughout Wales, I think this rule will bankrupt planning committees. I know that's the wrong word, but make them unable to work. So just as a point of information, with my executive member hat on, I propose writing to the Welsh Government and saying, can you look at this again, because you're impeding our planning committee and others.
Any other comments or questions around this? If not, then can I ask you to move and second those positions that we noted? Yeah. All those in favour? Anybody against? Any abstentions? Thank you. Those are agreed. So we go on to item 13, which is around the joint overview and scrutiny of Cardiff Capital Region City deal.
This is just a short report to advise of a change of our nominee for the Capital City Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee. From September of last year, when Councillor Jones stood down, we had to make a change, and Councillor Gordon was appointed. Since then, we've had another change, and Councillor Gordon has become member of the executive, and so she's had to stand down from this committee. So the name that's been put forward by the majority party is Councillor Veronica Crick.
Yeah.
I would like to thank Councillor Crick for coming forward to fill that vacancy. It is an important one, and it's one it's important to have a member with the experience and the ability to properly do the job, and also to help give that particular committee shall we say, a better gender balance than perhaps has been the case beforehand.
Any other questions or comments around this one? Not then, are we happy to agree it? Move second? Yeah. Show of hands, all in favour? Anybody against? Any abstentions? Thank you, those are agreed. So item 14 is motions on notice. So there aren't any. So we go on to item 15, which is member question time. Now, Councillor Slade isn't here today, so we're just going to take the questions, if I can find the right piece of paper, from Councillor Thomas instead. So would you like to go forward with your question?
Thank you, Chair. With the growing number of rough sleepers in the borough, has the executive member or the homeless team considered the idea of the council providing a safe space in Torvine where rough sleepers could be directed? A dedicated safe space provided by the council would demonstrate the authority's full commitment to addressing this very sensitive situation. A safe area, including provided portaloos, could create a real community where rough sleepers could help each other back into our communities. This go-to place could also make our support workers' lives much easier by targeting just one area where they know exactly where our rough sleepers are, enabling them to assist our rough sleepers far more effectively.
Okay, thanks for the question, Councillor Thomas, and also thanks for the opportunity to talk in greater length about rough sleeping earlier in the month at Extraordinary Council. Yes, I can confirm that we have discussed this, myself and officers, and the answer that we came up with was to open our first shelter within the borough, and that will be done so, I think, within the next few weeks. I did clarify with Councillor Thomas prior to the meeting that he's referring to outdoor provision, so my answer will now be based on that. So whilst the designated outdoor area would provide some additional short-term support to individuals sleeping rough, it does not necessarily support the long-term work of seeking to engage with people with a view to helping them remove themselves from a street-based lifestyle, ultimately being counterproductive in tackling rough sleeping. A single outdoor space for rough sleepers could also inadvertently lead to those using such a facility being targeted by others and left open to abuse and exploitation, as the place would quickly become known. Additionally, our individuals who are rough sleeping are scattered across the borough, and as such one such specific point or location would not be the preference of some individuals, this would then remove them from their familiar surroundings and networks, which are often chosen because they are critical to them. So as I laid out in the Extraordinary Council earlier this month, the work currently being undertaken by officers and agencies across the borough is predominantly focused on engaging with individuals with a view to finding permanent solutions to rough sleeping, and rather than providing services and facilities that in effect could perpetuate rough sleeping and potentially increase the overall problem. So we talked about the Housing First model, which I know you're a proponent of, and as I stated in the meeting, I'm also sold on that concept. And this model is ultimately what we're going to be working towards, because I think it is the most sustainable way of tackling rough sleeping for good. So, as promised to members in Extraordinary Council, I also bring a welcome update on our move away from using out-of-county B&Bs and towards using good quality local housing in Torfaen. So we've got one house now ready to be occupied, where the B&Bs provided 2 placements. This will now provide 4. And we'll soon be expanding to provide a second house, which will also provide 4 placements. So this will provide additional placements, which will hopefully mean that we can bring rough sleepers indoors in a more conducive environment to their recovery. I've seen a video of the first property that we'll be using, and it is very impressive. It's really well furnished, really well presented, and I think in combination with services such as Cornerstone to help them, sustain that tenancy and get back on their feet, I think it's likely to be the most successful way of permanently tackling rough sleeping. So once the second house is open, I think we'll have provision then to provide for rough sleepers in the borough. So thanks for the question again.
Councillor Thomas, do you have a supplementary? Okay, do you want to ask your second question then?
Thank you, Chair. Many residents have complained to me about how dangerous they feel it is to drive on Cumbrian Drive at night due to the fact it is a high-speed road and there are no street lamps on. Could the executive member consider turning some of them back on, given the grave concerns that residents have?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Thomas. Whilst I can sympathise with the views of residents, our decisions are based on policy and evidence. As many members will recall, the process of switching lights off was based on a lot of research and consultation. Importantly, there are no firm conclusions regarding the relationship between lighting levels and highway safety. In the case of Cumbrian Drive, cat's eyes were installed and an order has been placed for the central line marking to aid visibility. We are aware of the importance of Cumbrian Drive as a key distributor road and need to ensure the infrastructure to aid highway safety is at a good standard. I'm sure Council can appreciate that if the lights were switched on in one area due to concerns over safety, then lights would have to be switched on everywhere, which would cause a capital strain for upgrading the infrastructure and put new revenue strain on the budget. In addition to turning lights on, this doesn't coincide with our climate change emergency declaration. Part of the argument for switching off the lights was at the time, which was over 10 years ago, the saving of CO2 emissions. There is an appeals process in place, which has worked well in the past in reviewing lighting issues, particularly in your area, Councillor Thomas, and especially trying to work out a way forward. But unfortunately, at this time, we would not be able to switch the lights back on, as it stated for the reasons given.
A supplementary, Councillor.
Yes, I do. Thanks for that, Chair. I thought you might mention the stats on Cumbrian Drive. So just to be clear, until there is a serious accident whereby someone is seriously injured or killed due to zero lighting on Cumbrian Drive, those lights will not be turned back on.
The way that traffic accidents and any safety measures that we put in place, that they're applied for through grants, is through accidents, unfortunately. But I think it's important to stress that since 2009 to 2018, there's only been one recorded road traffic accident between that time period, which is quite a significant period of time to use as evidence as to how safe the area is. In addition to that, there have been numerous accidents around the roundabouts, but these are lit areas, so these demonstrate that a lack of lighting isn't always the cause of traffic incidences. And again, if we hadn't decommissioned the lighting that we had, the actual strain on the budget now would be close to £1 million, which is a significant amount to what we are spending, which is 400,000.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Moving on to agenda item 16, this is Cabinet decisions. So the first one's on page 157 of the agenda, decisions from the 19th of November 2019. Are there any issues, comments around this one? And then the second one is page 158, looking at decisions from the 7th of January 2020. No, in that case, are we happy to note those decisions? Have a show of hands, those in favour of noting. Anybody against? Any abstentions? Thank you. Okay, so item 17 is exclusion of the press and the public. Perhaps Alice would like to clarify why we're doing it.
Yes, the press and public are being excluded.
Sorry.
The press and public are being excluded from this item pursuant to paragraph 12 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act, as the report contains information identifying individuals which should not be made available to the public in accordance with the local resolution protocol. And the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information.
Thank you. Right, at this point I will pause the webcast.